Hello, guys. Welcome to another episode of the Funky Marketing Show. This is the show where I host people that are doing marketing, running the business, doing design, or whatever they are doing to contribute uh, to being better in their job, in what they do. And today we're going to talk about specific aspect that is really a part of the B2B buying journey, which is very complex. And dashboards, CRMs only give you just a little tiny part of the story, and it tells you only what happened. So how can you figure out like why it happened, why somebody bought your product, what are those steps that they are taking to get there, and how can you find the whole story? So how to do actually the customer research. Ryan Paul Gibson is my guest today, but first let's hit the funky intro and then we go. And we're back. My man, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. That's a great intro.
Yeah, it's a good old school one.
It is. I like that. What humanity required. Is that what it said? Did I read that right?
Yeah.
I dig it.
Yeah, it usually, like, I don't know who, Diane Verdu or somebody else told me like, man, you should get me on the screen while this is going because like I'm dancing all the way.
That's good.
Yeah, so tell me, how are you? How are things?
Things are good. I'm in Canada, so summer's coming. Summer's almost here, I guess. And it's an interesting time of year because a lot of companies now are starting to sort of rethink how the first quarter went. So that's usually when I get people reaching out to me because they're like, this
Nice.
wasn't working. Maybe we should do something different.
That's good. That's good to hear because like I'm feeling that some of them are actually, looking back and seeing if it was as they expected or not, and others are like, oh, the end of the year is just here. What are we gonna do?
Yeah.
And they're kind of stuck in that productive or not so productive, let's get results mood.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. The hamster wheel versus what do we do now? How do we get off it?
Yeah, exactly. So tell the people listening a little bit more about your background,
Yeah.
just so we can confirm that you are the guy for what we're talking about.
I don't even know that. I'm still trying to figure that one out. Am I the guy? I've been in marketing for about 20 years. But I took a short little segue into being a reporter, a journalist for about 3 years. I was in TV and radio, and then I went back to marketing, mostly B2B, and in the last 10 years, mostly with early stage like Series B type companies, right? Just to sort of define it. And
Mm-hmm.
my superpower, let's call it that, like my go-to has always been, I've always cared, all I've really ever cared about is like how and why customers buy. That's really been the driving force for me, because if you can understand the process in which they identify problems, figure out which ones are worth solving, why they chose the things they did to solve it, how they evaluated the things they chose, and now like what has that done for them in the business. That is essentially marketing. If you know those things, and you can influence the decision making process. So that's sort of how I where I land now, and we can get into like why I niche down in the sort of customer interviews. But one of the realities was I just noticed in the landscape people weren't doing it, or if they did it, they were doing it. They're really struggling with turning answers into actions, right? So that's really what I do. That's the short of it. There's probably way more than that, but that's the
Yeah,
short.
it reminds me a lot. I mean, we had a chat in the comments on LinkedIn, and found some similarities in our journey. But it reminds me a lot of, yeah, how did I get to B2B actually?
Yeah.
Leaving the agency when I was director of operations, and I had no idea that I'm going to get into the B2B from B2C. I
Yeah.
just, had a bunch of followers on LinkedIn, a bunch of connections, interacted with lots of people. So I jumped into, I think, like 270, something like that, virtual coffees with people. And so,
Yep.
like, the repeating pattern, and there's a gap over there and I can fill it in.
Yeah.
I guess that's what happened to you as well. And also, like, having that, I think, like, nerve for doing the research, since you are also
Yeah.
like a journalist.
I was, yeah. Well, that was part of it. Like, to give you a bit more depth into it, I started actually in B2C sort of. I started with a franchising company. So we sold
Hmm.
businesses to entrepreneurs. But I had to go do my own research. This is 20 years ago. And the thing is, in that world, it was consumer goods. It was food service. Customer research, or consumer research, sometimes what they call it, is so vital. But it's super expensive. So I couldn't afford to do it because we were a scrappy little chain of coffee shops. So I had to go do it myself. So I used to go and do what they call observational work, which is like
Hmm.
where you're watching people go through the queue. The translation to software would be like, heat maps, or watching people use the software. I go talk to customers, and I even go into the stores of competitors and start talking to customers and pretend I was a customer and ask them like what they like about this place and why they buy here. And people thought I was crazy, but I just needed to understand, because I just had to make better choices about how we spend our budget. So then, and when I became a journalist, that really solidified how I approach investigations, is oftentimes what I call them, but really interviewing a person and trying to get to a statement of fact, like what is happening, as opposed to like opinions and biases, and what I want to be true. And
Hmm.
then when I went back into tech, I actually worked for an incubator for a few years, and they had really good advisors, but they had no one who knew public relations. And I was a reporter and I knew business. So I'm like, yeah, I'll go help them. And one of the first things I'd ask the companies is like, so what are your customers saying to you about this? And like, oh, we don't talk to them. And I just like was floored,
That's so
like
typical.
couldn't believe it. And I think there's a whole bunch of reasons of why. There's not just one reason why people don't. There's actually a lot of reasons which we can get into. But that was the start of it for me, and I've just seen that pattern repeat. Whether it's an early stage startup to even someone that's just raised $40 million, they either don't talk to them in a way that produce insights to use in their marketing, or they're just really bad at it, and they're more product focused or CX focused or sales focused, which is fine, you need to be, but that doesn't necessarily always help you with marketing.
Yeah, man, it gets you another results. It gets you maybe a better product, a better, more sales. But that's all
Yep.
in the short run. In the long
Yeah,
run, you need to connect all the dots with
absolutely.
information that are actually true.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. Because it's the journey. One of the things I think we think of sometimes is the way that sales and customer success teams interact with a customer. That's actually the end of the journey for the most part. Like, they're
Hmm.
starting to use the product, if we're talking SaaS, right? Just who I mostly deal with. And that's fine. Like, you want to understand how they're using it, how can they build new things into the product, or new features, how is it moving the needle? Fair enough. But if you look at a buying journey, let's just use the funnel, which I'm not a big fan of, but let's just talk about it. That's the bottom of the funnel. All those things that are happening, like the middle and the top, that's marketing. And sales and customer success teams aren't necessarily going to ask questions that unlock insights into those parts of the buying journey, because what they're focused on is either closing a deal or retention, right? And making sure the
Hmm.
customer's using the product. So you need to understand, like, what's everything that's happening way before they even hit the website. Like, how are they thinking about problems? Why is that a problem? Right? How are they prioritizing the problems? Marketers can influence those things, and if you don't go and figure what those things are, it's going to be you're going to have a hard time marketing. That's sort of my stance on it.
Yeah, because there's a lots of people talking about attribution, about measuring
Oh yeah,
things, and
yeah,
Chris Walker and Unify Labs, how attribution is broken, and it really is, and how you
Yeah.
can use some simple methods, simple tactics to actually get. Maybe that's not like a huge data, but those are like guidance and feelings and insights that will tell you exactly what is actually happening, and will give you the first notice of how you're gonna get there. I'm talking about starting with asking questions on a website. How
Yeah.
did you hear about us? Why do you want to work with us specifically? Those kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Like a couple of days ago, I just used the sheet and added all the things that people answer on our website,
Yeah.
and it's so many things. Like, people are leaving paragraphs over there, like really talking, hey, I met this guy, he told me this, I went this way, or like, hey, I like Ivar, I'm from Romania, you're from Serbia, like, we should work together, or like
Yeah. Yeah.
totally different things, and different things depending on where they are coming from. Are they coming from LinkedIn? Are they coming from Twitter? Are they coming from Google? Or they are referred by a company or a person?
Yep. Like open fields are a good start. I agree with you there, but they're still limited, right? So,
Yeah, for sure.
and there's a few reasons they're limited. So, one is people don't always remember what they did in an instant where they have to be prompted to give an answer to something.
Hmm.
So they might say, "Where did you hear about me?" LinkedIn. But how in LinkedIn? Like, what was it about LinkedIn? Or sometimes they'll say Google. Great, but that actually was the end. What they actually did was maybe they saw you at a presentation 2 years ago, right? And they actually just Googled you, right?
Yeah,
And they might have forgotten.
that actually happened to me. They
Oh,
call
yeah,
they,
see, there
they
you go.
call me.
Yeah,
That's how I got first job in the agency. They didn't Google me, but they found me on Facebook, I think.
yeah,
And they told me, hey, we were listening to you 2 years ago in that conference. You were a speaker, and our CEO, who is in Canada, was in the city at the time, and the
okay.
whole team was there. So we are excited to ask you, what do you know about marketing?
Oh, wow, that's great.
Yeah.
And I've seen them. I have clients where they gave a presentation 2 years ago, and then I've talked to their customers, and they said, "Oh yeah," and then 2 years later, I was ready to buy. They they triggered my memory because of some on Twitter, right?
Hmm.
Or sometimes what happens is we forget that we've actually been following someone on social media for a while, and that we've decided to buy. But I want to get back to like the limitations. So
Hmm.
that's one limitation. The second limitation of though that starting phase that we often hang our hat on around open fields on a form at the website, it doesn't tell you why. Like it doesn't give context on why those decisions were made. A CRM is the same, right? You figure out things that happened. You don't actually understand why those things happened.
Hmm.
And why understanding why those things happened is 1,000 times more effective when you're trying to build a go-to-market strategy that influences and builds affinity from like that first thought, which is jobs to be done like language, which and anyone who's not familiar, that's sort of an innovation framework for understanding why people choose the solutions they do. So from that first idea where they're like, oh, this thing sucks. I hate this thing. We need to solve this thing. This is in my way. And then what are all the things that happen in succession to that, and the tipping of the scales for them to say 2 years later, yeah, I remembered you at that presentation. Now's the time. What happened in that 2 years? Like if the pain was so, if they knew the pain existed, why didn't they reach out right away? Right. So there's things you need to understand about that buying journey that you won't find in a CRM or in some of those open fields that we put in a form. They help, they're a good starting point to use your words, but it's not, there's more depth there that marketers can use to understand what they can do better with their marketing.
Yeah, I mean, look, the first time that I got into, how the fuck did this happen, was I was younger. I think it's like 10 plus years ago. I was running a local NGO, and we were organizing
Okay.
a youth festival, and there was a local stadium, old one, that needs to be rebuilt. So they needed to get everything down to the ground and start doing it again. So they allowed everybody to make their events, to organize some things, and like, my NGO was the biggest one in city working with youth, and they
Okay.
didn't. that means lots of advocacy, lots of confrontation with the local government,
Hmm.
around youth rights, around youth policies, those kind of stuff. So um, they say, no, you cannot organize the youth festival. And I was like,
Okay.
man, everybody can organize. Only us cannot. So I use my Facebook because I was always loud when it comes to the right things to do,
Yeah.
I name everybody, but in a context that is constructive, right? So everybody who is involved in decision making, I thought so. So the mayor, the director of home of culture, those kind of stuff. And in like 3 minutes, my father calls me. What the hell did you write on Facebook? Like, what happens? He's working in a home of culture, so his director called him, and
Oh
the mayor
no.
the mayor called director of home of culture. The mayor doesn't have social media, so somebody saw it and called him, and it all happens in 3 minutes. And when I finished the call with my dad, my mother called me because dad was calling her in the meantime as well. And I'm like, aha, so this is how things are happening. Every single thing we do, somebody is seeing it,
Yeah.
and we need to just be clever to know how the process goes, so we can then, when the next thing comes, know how to operate and how to actually, stop working from the end. When actually they are calling us like, what the fuck do we do? Then we go back to the beginning and say, aha, this is how we should do to involve everybody, so we get the approval before we actually propose something.
Yeah. That must have been an interesting call with your dad when he finally got in touch with you.
It was crazy, like, but the four calls happened in less than 3 minutes.
Amazing. Yeah. That's the new world we're in, right? And it's
And the
just if you don't
the
understand it,
most influential person in that in that group of people didn't
okay.
even have the social media and didn't ever see the post.
Wow. That's
But
wild.
yeah, as you said, that's the world we are living in. And
Yeah.
especially during the pandemic, things changed a lot. And B2B, especially, how people are buying, how does it goes, they change everything. Until they come to Google, they already have the intent. And they
Yeah.
already know what they're going to do. Who are they looking for? Is it the company? Is it the person? Do they need to just compare the tools? And for the most B2B SaaS companies, it's already too late when that happens.
Absolutely. Yeah. One of the things I've heard, this actually came up when I was talking to someone and doing some work with them. We were talking about their sales process, and they said we're always behind in deals.
Mm-hmm.
So what that means is they're often the sanity check against the the vendor that people have already chosen. So
Mm-hmm.
what was happening was much bigger companies or companies that had established their brand in a stronger way earlier on in a journey, they say someone picked them and they're like, okay, well, I can't just bring one choice to everybody because that looks like I'm soul sourcing. So they just hop into Google and find, they'll Google some keywords around that vertical or to like, this makes sense. And then a solution pops up. Okay, this one looks good. We'll throw this in to make it look like we've balanced out, the amount of choices we made. When really all that is that one's just to see, okay, is the pricing okay? Are we missing anything? But the intent of picking that solution is low. If that's happening to you and you're not closing a lot of deals, there's like you got to do something, and there's something off. So the earlier you can get into the consideration set of any company, like any buyer, the chance of you actually winning that deal, whether it's just a self-install software thing or it's like a bigger enterprise, there's about 4 people involved in the deal, the earlier you get into the consideration set, the better the chance of closing that deal. And that's what that my client was facing. They were getting the consideration set way too late, right? People
Mm.
had already made their choice. So you have to get in there early. The trick is though, how do you do that? And that CRM ain't going to tell you how to do that. That's where you need to definitely go and talk to customers and like start peeling back the layers about like what's happening and what's driving their choices.
Yeah, let's get into that. Where do we
Sure.
start?
Okay.
Where do we start?
It depends what you want to know, right? So
Mm-hmm.
there's different types of interviews, and we talked a bit about them already: customer success, product, UI, UX. I focus a lot on buying journey and to some point sales, because marketing and sales have like such a hybrid relationship, right? So
Mm-hmm.
they fully impact each other and they take different parts of a buying journey often. That said, if you want to really influence marketing, there's some myself and other researchers typically will look at it this way. So you want to pick clients that gave you a high contract value, have a high contract value or a good lifetime value, or really ones that just closed quickly and gave you a lot of money. Like that's a really easy way to look at it, right? And you want to do it with ones that have probably closed in the last few, 2 quarters last year. And there's a reason for all that. So the ones that are your best customers that are closing, those are the ones typically you want to attract more of. So you want to understand
Mm-hmm.
like what's happening and what are you doing well and why are they closing. And the reason why you want to pick customers that have just recently closed is that their recall is better. Remember we talked about how they might not remember things, or they waited 2 years within that process. So they'll have the best chance of remembering what was happening in them that 2 years. Because if you pick one of your best customers that closed 5 years ago, they might not remember at all why they bought you, how they bought you, or the person who bought you might not even be there, right? Now, those customers are really good for case studies and impact and all those things. But I'm talking about more like how is the buying journey that just happened, right, unfolding. So that's the first step of figuring out how you want to do that. And then you got to figure out like what does you want to know about that. So then you're going to ask them a lot of really probing questions about, what started the journey and what was each sort of catalyst along the way. And that's sort of how you first start that process.
Yeah, so basically you are trying to figure out how is the relationship built, what caused the
Absolutely.
first interaction,
Yeah.
and how did you keep building that relationship.
Yeah, I look at it as like I'm reverse engineering how they systematically made choices, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's
So
well said.
it's there's different ways to approach it, right? I follow a methodology, like I said, called jobs to be done. Not really to its full extent. I'm not because jobs be done people, and you can Google it, but it's like I said, an innovation framework, and it's usually used for either full on positioning or for innovating new products, because the whole methodology or around the rationale around jobs to be done is we don't just buy a product for the sake of the product. We buy it because it gets us to somewhere we want to go. There's an end state.
Mm-hmm.
There's a thing we want to do. There's a few examples people give. One of the most common examples is um, I don't buy a drill to put a hole in the wall. I buy a drill to hang a picture, right? That's often what people will say. So there's somewhere I want to get. What's great though is that methodology works well for figuring out how people are making choices about existing products that maybe already have a market. Because it's still that same logical thought process that they go through about making trade-offs and prioritizing and what's important, what's not, and why this and not that. So I've one really good way to sort of start that process is I will, if I begin an interview, I'll say, I don't want to talk about you just about the point when you decided you wanted to buy X. Take me to the point where X became a problem. Let's start there. And they'll say, well, what? And I'll say, what happened after when you identified X was a problem? What happened next? What did you do? And that's what I care about. I don't care more about like, did you like your thing? Is it do you like? Are the buttons the right colors? Great. What feature do you use? I don't care about that so much. What I care about is like what they did, were the actions they took, what were they thinking about, how this fit into the business and why.
Mm-hmm.
That's where I start. And then we just sort of logically move along each phase from, okay, here's how they identified the problem. Here's how they how they looked around and researched. Here's how they evaluated a short list, around or that consideration, like their consideration set. How did they evaluate that, and why did they choose this one at the end? Things like I always ask questions like, what made you trust us? You know, why? What about the sales team was believable? Right? Things like that, because then people really give you good answers in that whole process. So that's sort of how it unfolds for me. There's more to it than that, but at a high level, that's the stages that I'm looking at. And if you think about a buying journey, that's like awareness, consideration, purchase, right? I'm just using different language around it.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, usually what I'm missing with jobs to be done is like people don't go too deep into things not related to the business.
No.
For example, that's what's missing to me. Because but that's not only when you figure out how they are buying, but even before they buy. So
Yeah.
where they're hanging out, how things happening. Because especially depending on who is your buyer,
Hmm.
like there are some groups that are really hard to target, hard to get
Absolutely.
information about them, and you need to get into those small things, smaller communities to get those information. And then usually what I see is that lots of things unravel that are related to, I don't know, like board games or just some other stuff which are related to the business in a way, but in a
Yep.
way they aren't.
Yeah, I care. That's, I think, probably unique to me is I care a lot about the business model, right? Which is, you're right. The jobs to be done doesn't necessarily get into that from what
Hmm.
my experience with it is. And the reason I care about that is like the business model of a buyer is, you think about it, there's different priorities in their business model. There's different needs that they have, as different business models have different pains and at different sizes of growth. So, for example, say you and I are selling into a director of marketing. Well, the director of marketing at a 10-person startup is probably going to have much different responsibilities than a director of marketing at a 500-person
Yeah.
software company, right? They might not even be touching the product, but they might be the one who first triggers something to triggers a team to find a solution, right? So I care about the business model too, and I ask them things like, when I'm talking to them, I'll say, "Tell me about your role. What do you care about? As in, what are your priorities? What are your responsibilities? What do you need to get done?" Now, some of that we actually use in case study, like language and sales enablement. But I care more about like, what are they doing as a business to make money? How do they make money? Right? Because then, if I understand those things, then I can start building marketing that caters to that stuff, and I can give them things that they need. Right? Like one of the things that comes out of the work I do is it's not just content topics, right, and content themes. It's like which content is relevant at which stage of the buying journey, right? Oftentimes we'll just go to SEMrush or Ahrefs, which are great tools, and we're like, okay, that works. That looks like high intent, sure, but like, what stage of that is a buying journey? Often we're still trying to capture everything that's just before a sale.
Yeah.
What's happening when they're in that, like, sort of they're figuring out how to solve problems? How can you help them there so that as they move along, they'll land on you and they'll remember you? So that's a lot of the things that I get out of the research I do too when I talk to buyers and customers.
Yeah, and like clarity, which is obvious that you
Clarity.
got out of it, and also like one thing that we I think often forget, like when you do a really good customer research, and when you know all those things that you just talked about, we know where
Yep.
to spend the money, and where
Oh
to spend
man,
it first, when to spend it afterwards.
it's. I worked with a company once. We realized they were wasting a third of their budget on a segment that didn't care about them. A third. That's huge. Like, you can't afford to
Yeah.
waste. There's only so much time and money, right? When it comes to any part of the business, doesn't matter if you're in development or finance or whatever, HR. There's only so much time and money. Everyone's executives are always debating who should get the biggest piece of the pie.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you build the best business case for the money you need that you're going to spend and invest wisely into the business to get a return? if you're not going out and collecting qualitative research to help inform that and like how people are actually making decisions, yeah, you're just guessing and then you're wasting. And then you're going to have that thing where, you know, people go into a quarterly review or an annual operating plan. They're like, oh, we didn't hit our lead target. What are we got to double next quarter? What are we going to do, everybody? I've been in that meeting as a marketing manager when I was working for a tech company. They're like, we need more leads next month. What are we going to do, everyone? If you're already asking that question in the boardroom a month before the next, like before the next month, like you've already lost, in my humble opinion. So it's like you need to understand if you like what's actually happening out in the market to be able to get people in your vicinity so you can actually maybe close deals at a faster and get a better pipeline and higher velocity. All those things we talk about.
I mean, there are so many examples. Like, when I first started working, I worked with a lot of early stage startup recently, and
Yeah.
when I asked them like, "Is there an existing demand?" Like, all of them will say yes. All of them will say yes. Is it enough? Yeah, sure it is. Like, when I go to first to the same rush, those kind of things. When I look at it, like, there's no data at all.
Yeah.
So there's no data at all. If I go and manually type it, I will find some things. And then I go and I say, okay, I sometimes when I cannot find enough data, I use, for example, Google Ads to just figure things out, to use them as a sort of a research. And like,
Yeah.
okay, there are 60 clicks on your branded keywords. Who are those people? Because there's no way that 60 people are looking at your branded keywords at this moment. So
Yeah.
like,
Especially as an early stage company.
yeah. So okay, there are people who we are doing outreach to. There are people who are logging into the software. Sometimes they go through Google. I don't know
Okay.
why, even why they are clicking on the ad, but and like there's no actually the demand. Like nobody's actually coming to the website to because they are interested in what you're buying and they know about you because you're not
Yeah.
present on social media, you're not anywhere, so you don't create the awareness that you exist at all. And I'm like, okay, so here's what we're gonna do, but that's not gonna get us 50 leads in the first month. Of course not. Like,
No,
because there needs to be stages, but one thing I wanted to say, like, if you do what you and I are talking about, then
mhm.
you are clear with them why you should do those things, because
Yeah.
they went with you on a research on a journey, and you took them in exact places where they need to go to find out why they need to do certain things first, and then certain things after those.
Yeah. Let me give you an example, like especially with the early stage stuff. But I mean, I just worked with a client that the company was acquired. So someone built the company and then they sold it. And they were having a challenge getting new business in. And it wasn't they had a hunch of what was happening, but they weren't sure. And the challenge was it was the founder was basically the pipeline. That was it. Which is makes sense. A lot of companies when they start up, your company's like that. You are the pipeline, right?
Yeah.
Like that makes sense. But they had done nothing to build any to de-risk, how if that founder left, how can they still get awareness and eyeballs on them, right? So it's just like if you don't again, it gets back to like if you don't understand way before people even know you exist, how are they thinking about problems similar to the ones you solve? How do they think about how those fit into the business? How do they go and look for those as solutions? And then it becomes a trade-off of, okay, what do we think makes sense for how we're positioned, what our budget is, and how we can get a foothold in the market and compete. All those things meld together, right? There's
Hmm.
never just one solution. It's usually like a few paths, and you're going to experiment and try a few things. But you won't know what to experiment, what to try, what's going to have like what will have a better odds of succeeding if you're not going to figure out how people are deciding about products and talk and like how the market thinks about these things. So yeah, it's the early stage companies are interesting though because it's like If they're very early, that's exactly what the situation described. No one's searching for the thing because it's ahead of the game. So they have to build awareness and educate a market about like why I built this in the first place. Here's what's coming. Why you need to know we exist. Doesn't mean you're gonna get sales tomorrow, but at least people will understand that you're around, right? I've seen that before too, so many times.
Yeah, and there is one thing that we didn't mention. With people usually go, how we're going to do the interviews, how we're going to find out those information. We're going to do the surveys, and
Yeah,
if you do the survey, and your target audience doesn't know that your product or the service ever existed, because you are, especially now in B2B tech, when we are creating new things every day,
yeah,
like they're going to give you the answer based on what they know, right?
yeah,
And they're going to expect the solution based on what's in your survey. And if you
yeah,
don't give them that solution, obviously your product or service is not that solution because it's the new one. They don't know about it. They will
yeah.
be pissed if that solution doesn't solve the problem.
Oh yeah.
And then you are again, like not here,
Or
not
yeah,
there.
or if people think it's a problem, right?
Yeah, yeah,
I've done that. I've
that's
done a
yeah,
survey where the company's like, we built the thing. Let's go figure out how many people like it. And then it's like 10% of respondents think it's a problem. Uh-oh. Now what? Now, here's the thing though. Maybe you can build a business off that 10%. So what does your business model look like? How do you do marketing? Maybe for the first 2 years, it's just you in Discord, talking to a bunch of people for 2 years, and that's your marketing as the founder until the market catches up to you. Don't know, right? If you don't understand these things, again, like I'm sounding like a broken record here, but it's like that's how you compete in a market is understanding like how people make decisions. So yeah, um, the one thing I will say about the customer interviews too is it increases your alignment as well in the company. So
yeah,
one of the things that I did as a marketing manager, like I did mention that before. I ran marketing in a tech company for a period of time, and you have your
yeah,
sales, like you have your quarterly or like your biweekly sales meetings. I was always a little different. I always was one that my director of sales and I would have daily conversations. We worked really well together. I'd just go into the sales floor and like ask them questions every day, like in real time. I have an idea. Does this sound crazy? Right? Like, because they're always a good litmus test. The challenge is though, I said before, sales sees a part of the buying journey, marketing sees another part of the buying journey. So they often have different opinions on what's going to work. That's why sales always wants like, I need a new case study. I need a new thing like that fits that part of the process. Because yeah, they're trying to close a deal. Marketing is like much different. Well, we need a better brand and we need like whatever. Probably do. But then they argue about whether those things are relevant because they see different parts of the journey. If you work together on building like what that actual journey looks like, because what I do when I interview a cohort of 12 people is I transcribe everything, I pull out their words about how they talk about different parts of that buying journey. Here's what I thought here. This is what I think about when I'm here. This is what I cared about here. We put it all together. We find a commonality and an average among the cohort, like something that's statistically relevant. And then we build a giant thing that's shared directly in sales and marketing. You should see how things change. It is wild. And it's not only just like it's not an overnight thing. It takes time to shift a culture around like who a buyer is. But all those arguments and those either whether it's political or it's like turf war or whatever, those things start to drop off. And it's really about, hey, the research told us this. We should maybe try this based on what we see now in the market. That's a big one that I just wanted to touch on because I think that we always talk about sales and marketing alignment. That's a really great way to get it.
yeah. I agree. I had an example. I didn't do anything there. I was a consultant and we did something else. But when we talked about and we figure out, like um, the company didn't know in which category they should go and market,
Yeah.
because it was user onboarding,
Yeah.
so onboarding no code tool, And
Okay.
basically what they were looking for, talking with customers, like their product team is constantly looking talking with the customers to find out, what they should build next, where they should develop the product. But also
Yep.
customer success is talking with them all the time. Marketing wasn't talking with them, but
Yeah.
marketing was talking with both customer success and product team.
Okay.
And what they figure out is that, people are calling their product in lots of different names, and they're using
Mm.
it in a lots of different ways. They figure out we don't need to choose one category. We can rank in five, because people are using the tool in five different ways and calling it different names.
Okay.
So that's where they do. They say, okay, let's because we can cover so many things. Let's build up so that sort of talk like a media company,
Yeah.
produce content, get writers in house, teach them how to do it, and let's become the company that has the most content, the most relevant one for all those things. And that's how we're going to stand up. And it goes well for them. At the moment,
Yeah.
it goes really well.
That's interesting because usually that runs counter to like what you see is like niche down into one thing.
Yeah, yeah. That's why I mentioned it's totally, different way of looking at things, and they wouldn't even know if they didn't talk to the customers.
Yeah. There's so many ways that it all unfolds, right? Like one, if you go to my website, if people are interested, contentlift.io, and I have what I call my one case study because I'm what you would call a productized service. So like I have a rinse and repeat process, right? I'm not sure if you're the same, but that's sort of like a research process, and here's the output. And the company, I still do work with them because I do a bit of fractional work like you do, but I'm not a CMO. I'm just sort of hide in the background and I get thrown the odd project. But we when we did the research project with Rewind, what we noticed was there was a big piece of the buying journey that was missing, and it was different than how some of their other verticals were approaching the product. So, and just to explain it, Rewind does backup for software, backups for SaaS,
Mm-hmm.
because the most big SaaS platforms like Shopify, they actually can't guarantee they can restore your data if everything gets lost. It's actually in the fine print for most big SaaS platforms. So Rewind comes in and is like, just make sure that everything's in place. So when we went and spoke to, they'd acquired a GitHub solution, like for GitHub, that's a coding platform or a repository, I should say.
Mm-hmm.
So what we found, until we didn't realize, we sort of knew something this was happening, but we didn't realize the extent it was happening, because they were telling the developers or like development teams, they're always trying to build their own version of this backup software. The challenge was they're always failing, because what they didn't want the job to be done, they didn't want a backup. What they wanted was to be able to restore data if it all got lost. Can't do that with the way the APIs work in the software. It's always changing. So the backup, the restoration, do-it-yourself thing they were building never worked. So that was a big piece of what we're missing, because most of them were trying to do that, and we weren't talking about that anywhere in our marketing. Like and how we phrase it was, stop doing this because you're wasting your time. And then from there, the installs started to spike up, just for some small tweaks, right? Around understanding like what people were actually doing as opposed to guessing what they cared about. It was interesting too, even with like their Shopify product. When I started talking to their e-commerce customers, Rewind positions itself as data backups. Talk to the e-commerce people, they never use the word data once, not even once. They said SKUs, product listings, my store. They never said data. This is not how they thought. It's not how their brain worked,
Yeah.
right? So with things like we make all these assumptions at the beginning, either the founder who created the thing, the initial team, about like, I built this is what I think is going to save the world. This is how we should talk about it. Maybe, but perhaps not. So you have to go figure like, how are people talking about these things? What are the words they're using, right? Maybe it is the example you gave. You know, we actually are in five things, and we have to strategically have to aim high and cast a wide net, or maybe you're very niche and you have to like get into a few really nooks and crannies to build affinity over time because you're early in the market. Don't know, right? This is where the customer research really comes into play.
Yeah. Love that, man. We usually assume how people are talking about things, how they are calling it, without actually having a proper data. But
Yeah,
but
man.
tell me and tell the people listening one thing. How do we make sure? What do we need to do to make sure when we get to the interview that we extract the right information from the people?
Yeah, that's always a challenging part. It's funny when I was reading a lot of the jobs be done stuff for years. Intercom had this great document everyone talked about for the longest time about how they took the jobs be done methodology and put it into a SaaS context, which it is a good document. People can still find it today. But again, it's more around like how do you build a widget that like moves the needle, and how do you build things, the great next product, right? I always like, well, how does this translate to marketing, right? And I was always struggled with that. Um, I don't have all the answers, funny enough,
Of
but this is
course.
how I that's how, this is how I look at it. And this is how I try to explain and help people with is it's all about having again research objectives that meet a certain specific need, right? So what is it we want to know? And then structuring your interviews in a way that you're producing relevant insights. So there's a few ways you can do that. One is you can have the same standard of questions, right?
Hmm.
A set questions like, and you ask each question the same every time. That's what I used to do early on in my career. I don't necessarily do that now, but if you're just starting out, it's a really easy way to say, okay, here's 6 questions. I'll ask 12 customers these same questions, and I'll get hopefully similar answers, and I look for themes and patterns. What I try to do now is I care about, I mentioned before, actions. If someone gives me an opinion, that's great, but I want more about like the actions they took, right? Step one, step two. And then I'll actually try to tie everything to their timeline of decisions. Because
Hmm.
people are very interesting. Like when you ask them to talk about something that happened, or you ask them questions, they go off on all sorts of tangents because they're trying to be helpful. So they're trying to give you a whole bunch of information at once. But that doesn't necessarily help you because it's just all they've given you is like a high surface level answer about what might have happened. So I'll go back to that question I started with, which was let's start at the beginning. When did you first realize there was a problem? What did you do? And I'll say, oh, I did this and this and this. This is January, I did this. And then in March, in January, I did this. And in August, we found the solution. Okay, great. August, found the solution. Thanks. Let's go back to January. What did you do next after you thought you looked on LinkedIn? What did you do next? Like, I take people back to that systematic place because what I'm trying to do is get in those buckets of how they researched, how they evaluated, how did they choose the short list and choose the ones on the short list. So if you can bucket those answers into those frameworks, I'm answering your question, then you can look for themes and patterns that fit. That's how you
Hmm.
find relevant data. Because if you're just randomly talking to people like having a nice chat like we are now, it's not a structured, controlled environment where you're going to get good answers that you can extract insights from. It's just going to be a nice, friendly conversation. And if you go back and listen to recordings, you're like, oh my god, there's 12 different answers to like all these things because you didn't structure the conversation in a way ahead of time that you could drive statistically relevant information to impact your marketing. I hope that answers the question. I hope I answered the question.
Yeah, you did. You did.
Okay.
And what you said happens a lot with this podcast.
Yeah, that's okay though. Like that's this environment, right?
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean,
No, I like to take people usually, in the circle. Start
yeah,
with
yeah,
one thing, they go to another, then I can go to,
yeah,
end with the first thing,
yeah,
conclude with something. But it helps a lot, and I want to emphasize one thing that you said. It also changed a lot of things for me and looking for actions,
yeah,
because
absolutely.
that's a game changer over there, because like they can have opinions, they can talk about things. Oh, I was thinking about this, but what did you actually do?
Yeah. And it's so easy to just go do stuff. I mean, one of the reasons why I really believe in this too is because I was that marketer that made all those mistakes. I've lived that life. When I when I first went back to marketing, this is 2010. I didn't know what Salesforce was, which sounds crazy. But I had been out of the game because I worked in a legacy industry. I told you I worked in franchising and food service. We didn't
Mm-hmm.
use SaaS. Those industries are slow to technological adoption, usually. And then I went and became a reporter. And then I came back and started working with startups at the incubator. And they're like, "Yeah, we use Salesforce." I'm like, "What is this Salesforce you speak of?" And then so I go and look, and I was just like floored. I was like, "This is the answer. Where has this been my whole life? This CRM. This is all I ever need. I don't need anything else." I was totally drunk with like what I saw, right? And now I think you're starting to, and then I was also that market. Then I just go do stuff, right? Yeah, Google's telling me this. I'm gonna go try this now. And then I'm like most marketers. I think you see now where last few years I came to realization like it's just part of the answer. There's it's just one thing out of a lot of things you need to understand, right? So the pendulum I think is swung back to like where I started back in the stores talking to competitors, customers. I'm like, so why did you buy from this? Like I'm full circle to use. You just said I'm still use CRMs. They're still vital tools that tell you a lot of stuff, but they don't necessarily tell you how to do marketing. They just help start to they start giving you some guidance on where you need to start peeling back the layers about how you can market to a certain segment of people.
Yeah, I mean, look, if I know, usually what people say, go to CRM, go to Analytics, go to Google Search Console. Like CRM will give you all the answers what's happening. Analytics will fill in with some other stuff, like what's
Yeah,
happening on a website. Google Search Console will give you the answers what's happening, how they are coming to the website.
yeah,
But when you get into details and how people in B2B tech actually buy, then you find three answers. One is asking in a community when they
yeah.
have like 10, 20 people that they trust.
Hmm.
Posting on social media, asking people, just do you have experience with this guy or with this tool, or just picking up the phone and calling three people who are your peers working in the same industry that maybe have experience or in a further along in your journey where you are, and asking them about this. And
Yep.
when you go back to all those CRM, Google Search Console, Analytics, that answer is nowhere to find over there.
No.
You cannot see those three things how they are buying. You cannot find them over there.
No, you can't. And what I'll say is too, when someone refers you in a community, why did they? Like, I want to understand that, and I want to understand. I'd want to know if someone then came to my website, what are they hoping to see? What do they need? What do I need to do if they're not ready to buy, which is probably true, right? Because the numbers are, usually five. Like I've seen different numbers. Some people say 95% of a market's not ready to buy. I've seen as low as like 80, 80, 85, 89. Doesn't matter. The majority are not ready. So how do you stay top of mind? How do you always stay around that when it is 2 years later, like we talked about, you're still the first person? Because they might forget they got that referral. It
Mm-hmm.
happens.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, it started there. There's a reason it happened. And now your job as a marketer is to make sure that person never stops considering you. How do you do that? What does that look like? What is the process of that? And it's not just like buy my thing now over and over again with ads. That's not it, right? So that's again, like that's why I love the research part. It just unlocks all this stuff.
But I wanted to tell you, like, what did you just said is exactly the reasons why I switched from the agency model and how we were to something that we are now becoming. Um
Yeah.
by looking at who's recommending us and finding out why.
Yep.
Like, and actually, it's scary to look at the names that are recommending us, and it's kind of, like you have a responsibility to provide. And then, because like it's Refine Labs, it's Peplaya. It's like
Yeah.
those are some of the top names in the industry,
Yeah.
and
Absolutely.
and when you go back, do your research, and find out why they're recommending you, then you can see, do I want to be somebody that's a second option, or do I want to be somebody that's recommended for great work, or it's something else? And that's exactly the data that I use to kind of change the website and restructure a thing, because people were recommending us only for ads, because they were thinking like demand generation is advertising. There's
Yeah.
that kind of shift in I think especially in the US,
Right.
and like I said, okay, we're gonna remove demand generation from the website at all. Like we're
Yeah.
not gonna talk about that.
Yeah. Makes it like, but it was right for a time. It was
I mean,
that.
look, it's
It's just not
advertising.
anymore.
It's SEO. It's a lot of stuff, and for
Yeah.
every company is doing it differently depending on a niche or an
Yeah.
industry or whatever. It's not one thing or the other. That's the problem,
Yeah.
And by using just advertising, you're just somebody that's implementing one segment of it.
Yeah. B2B is such a fascinating industry, especially the tech side now, because it's almost like it moves so fast that I think the people who are, this is just my quick hot take as we're wrapping up. I think the people that had success 5, 8 years ago, even 5 years ago, the playbooks that they ran, they think still work, and they might,
Mm-hmm.
but for the most part, they probably don't anymore. Like this market of SaaS and SaaS enabled products just moves at such a speed of growth and pace that it's that thing where we talk about B2C versus B2B now. Use B2C marketing B2B. I think it's just because there's so much um, ubiquity now in SaaS. It's so big. There's so much choice that's why that's seeped in, right? The price, there's just more choices. The prices are still racing to the bottom. I can be one person that has discretionary budget that might buy a tool at $7 a month, and that's all I need. I mean, look at Notion. People are building entire businesses inside Notion,
Yeah.
right, for pennies. So it's just like it's so big and expansive now that you need to the whole like old school of just need SEO and ads. It's not going to work anymore, right? There's so much more that happens within that world. So yeah, going out and figuring out why is like it's probably the only way you're gonna save your marketing budget. I'll end it there.
Agreed.
I don't know. Yeah,
Agreed. That's a great conclusion, I'd say. So tell people when can they find you to help them actually figure out
yeah,
the why.
yeah. I'm on LinkedIn like you. I'm there a lot. I pretty much live there. My wife's concerned about my level of LinkedIn usage and if it's unhealthy. Probably is. But I'm there and I'm always happy. Anyone can reach out, DM, send me a message, connect with me. I'm always happy to answer as many questions as I can and help people. And I also have contentlift.io, which just takes you a bit through like how I actually do my thing, right? And um, that's usually a good resource if people actually want to maybe explore working together. That's a great place to start. But yeah, LinkedIn is the best place to find me.
Yeah, sounds good. Guys, now is the time to do what we talked about here, to go back to the beginning of the episode and listen to everything one more
Okay.
time. And I recommend, especially for this one, go ahead and start Googling when you hear when you hear Ryan talking about specific things. Go ahead and actually try to find more information about it. See if it works for you, if it rings a bell. If not,
Yeah.
go back to him, maybe ask for advice, whatever is happening.
Yeah.
But try to use, I'm always saying this, try to use an episode to help you in your growth and to get to the next level. And one thing that we always used to end the episode with is keep it funky, as always. Life is
Yeah.
not
I
that
love it.
serious.
I love it. I love it.
Bye bye, guys.